She traveled 1,000 miles for a new life, armed with a black-and-white photograph and a promise of a home. What she found was a loving, ready-made family. 3 sweet children who within days began to call her Mama. Their father, a handsome, gentle rancher named Caleb Hawthorne, seemed to be everything she'd ever dreamed of. But a weathered piece of paper tacked to the sheriff's notice board would soon tear her dream apart. It bore Caleb's face but a different name, Cain Maddox. Wanted, fugitive, and the price on his head was enough to get a man killed. The train groaned a weary beast of iron and steam as it clawed its way across the vast, unforgiving plains of the Montana Territory. For 3 days, Abigail Fletcher had been its passenger, her world reduced to the rhythmic clatter of wheels on steel and the ever-changing tapestry of the American West framed by the dusty window. Each mile pushed her old life in Boston further into the realm of memory, a life of genteel poverty, of hushed rooms, and the stifling expectations placed on a woman of 24, with no dowry and even fewer prospects. Clutched in her hands, the sweat from her palms making the paper soft and pliable, was her future. It was a photograph of a man named Caleb Hawthorne. He wasn't smiling men in photographs, rarely did, but there was a kindness in his eyes that seemed to defy the stoic set of his jaw. His hair was dark, his shoulders broad beneath a simple work shirt. He looked like a man who knew the land, who could build a life from it with his own 2 hands. His letter, penned in a surprisingly elegant script, had been brief but sincere. He was a widower, a rancher with a modest spread just outside a town called Redemption Gulch. He had 3 young children, he'd written, and he was seeking not just a wife, but a mother for them. He sought a partner in creating a home. For Abigail, who had spent her life as a companion to a series of increasingly cantankerous wealthy aunts, the words were a lifeline, a home, a family, the chance to be more than just a forgotten niece living on charity. The idea of children her own to love and care for was a secret fervent wish she had barely dared to acknowledge. So she had packed her single trunk, purchased her one-way ticket, and placed her faith in the kind eyes of a man in a photograph. Redemption Gulch was little more than a single wide street carved out of the wilderness, flanked by wooden storefronts with faded paint. Dust fine as cinnamon coated everything. The air smelled of pine horse and baking bread. It was raw, untamed, and for a moment Abigail's courage faltered. This was a world away from the cobblestone streets and gas lamps of Boston. As she stepped onto the wooden platform, her dark green traveling suit heavy and out of place, she scanned the handful of faces. A few cowboys, a woman with a market basket, a stern-looking man in a dusty bowler hat. None of them were Caleb Hawthorne. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Had he changed his mind? Was this all a foolish, desperate mistake? Then a man detached himself from the shadows of the station master's office. He was taller than his photograph suggested, and the kindness in his eyes was even more pronounced in person. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim nervously. "Miss Fletcher," he asked, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. Mr. Hawthorne, Abigail breathed a wave of relief washing over her. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you. The pleasure is all mine," he said, a faint shy smile touching his lips. "Please call me Caleb." He gestured toward a buckboard wagon where 3 small heads peeked over the side. "And these are my reasons for everything." As they drew closer, the children ducked down, then popped back up like prairie dogs. The eldest, a boy of about 8, with his father's serious eyes, held a protective arm in front of his younger siblings. The middle child, another boy, with a shock of sandy hair and a smattering of freckles, offered a tentative wave, and the youngest, a little girl with tangled blonde curls and a thumb stuck firmly in her mouth, stared at Abigail with wide, curious blue eyes. "This is Matthew," Caleb said, ruffling the eldest boy's hair. "This is Luke." The middle boy flushed with pride at being introduced. "And this little tumbleweed is Josephine. We call her Josie." Abigail's heart, which had been pounding with nervous energy, seemed to melt. She knelt, ignoring the dust that immediately clung to her skirt, bringing herself to their level. "It is a true honor to meet you all," she said softly, her voice genuine and warm. "My name is Abigail." Matthew's gaze was wary, assessing. Luke's was hopeful, but it was little Josie who sealed the moment. She took her thumb out of her mouth, toddled forward, and placed a sticky hand on Abigail's cheek. She patted it gently, her expression one of simple, profound curiosity. Pretty Josie declared, her voice muffled but clear. A lump formed in Abigail's throat. Caleb let out a soft, relieved breath. "Well," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the house isn't much, but it's sturdy. And the land is good. I hope it can be a good home for you, Abigail." As they rode out of the small town and into the rolling hills, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, Abigail held on to Josie, who had insisted on riding in her lap. Luke chattered away, pointing out landmarks, a hawk's nest, a funny-shaped rock, the creek where they caught frogs, while Matthew remained silent, watching his father, then watching Abigail, his young mind clearly trying to piece together what this new woman's arrival meant for his family. The ranch house was a simple, sturdy log structure, smoke curling invitingly from its stone chimney. It was not grand, but it exuded a sense of shelter and warmth that Abigail found herself desperately craving. This was it, the start of everything. A real home, a real family. As Caleb lifted a sleeping Josie from her arms, their fingers brushed. A spark unexpected and warm passed between them. He met her gaze, his expression full of a hope that mirrored her own. That night, tucked into a small but clean room, the unfamiliar sounds of the country, the chirp of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote lulling her to sleep. Abigail allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that she had made the right choice. She was no longer Abigail Fletcher, the forgotten niece. She was here to become Mrs. Hawthorne, a wife, a partner. She was here to become a mother. The photograph and the promise had been real. The man with the kind eyes was real. And as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't possibly imagine the dark secrets that lay hidden behind them. The first few weeks at the Hawthorne Ranch passed in a blur of domestic activity that was both exhausting and profoundly satisfying for Abigail. She learned the rhythms of the house and the land, the quiet language of a family healing from a loss she could only guess at. Caleb rarely spoke of his late wife Martha, and when he did, it was with a deep, abiding sadness that Abigail respected enough not to pry into. A small, simple wooden cross on a hill overlooking the homestead was the only other testament to her existence. The children, however, were a living, breathing testament to the love that had once filled this home, and it was the children who claimed Abigail's heart completely. Matthew, the solemn, watchful one, was the last to warm to her. He observed her every move, from the way she kneaded bread to how she mended his torn trousers. He was testing her. She knew, weighing her worthiness to step into the void his mother had left. The turning point came one afternoon when a skittish calf kicked over a lantern in the barn. Before Caleb could react, a small fire licked up a pile of dry hay. While the men panicked, Abigail, her Boston composure taking over, grabbed a heavy horse blanket, soaked it in the water trough, and smothered the flames with surprising efficiency. Later that evening, as she sat on the porch, Matthew came and sat beside her, not speaking, but simply leaning his small frame against her arm. It was a silent, powerful acceptance. Luke was her shadow from the beginning. He was a fount of endless questions and stories, a sensitive soul who brought her wildflowers and confessed his fear of thunderstorms. She would read to him in the evenings from the one book she'd brought with her. Treasure Island, his eyes wide with wonder at the tales of pirates and adventure, a world away from their landlocked life. But it was little Josie who gave her the name that would redefine her. One morning, as Abigail was helping her button her dress, the little girl looked up, her blue eyes clear and certain. "Mama," she said the word as natural as breathing. "Button Mama." Abigail froze her fingers, fumbling. Caleb, who was walking past the open doorway, stopped dead in his tracks. His face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, pain, memory, and a startling, overwhelming gratitude. He met Abigail's wide eyes over Josie's blonde head, and in that silent, shared moment, something shifted. The arrangement, the mail-order agreement, fell away, and something real and fragile began to take its place. From that day on, to the children, she was simply Mama. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Abigail found joy in the simple, demanding tasks of running a household. She planted a small vegetable garden, her hands once soft and pale, becoming calloused and brown from the sun. She learned to cook on the wood-fired stove, to churn butter, and to listen for the specific cry that meant Josie had woken from her nap. Yet amidst this newfound contentment, tiny unsettling details began to surface like rocks revealed by a receding tide. Caleb was a good man, attentive and gentle, but he was also a man who lived with his back to the world. He disliked trips into Redemption Gulch, always finding a reason to send one of his ranch hands, a laconic old-timer named Ben, instead. On the rare occasions he had to go, he seemed perpetually on edge, his eyes scanning the street, his hand never straying far from the Colt peacemaker holstered at his hip, a common enough sight in Montana, yet his grip on it seemed tighter than most. One afternoon, a traveling photographer, a jovial man named Albert Hines, with a wagon full of clanking equipment, came by the ranch. He offered to take a family portrait for a modest fee. The children were ecstatic. Abigail, too, loved the idea of capturing this new life, this family she had come to cherish. Caleb, however, refused, firmly. "It's a waste of money, Abigail," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We have work to do." He turned away, his shoulders tense, leaving Abigail standing on the porch with a disappointed Albert and 3 crestfallen children. It wasn't about the money, she knew. It was something else, a deep, inexplicable aversion to having his image recorded. Then there were the nightmares. Some nights she would be woken by his muffled shouts from the spare room he still slept in, a respectful distance he'd maintained since her arrival. They were fragmented cries, words she couldn't quite make out, but they were filled with a terror that chilled her to the bone. When she would ask him about them the next morning, he would just shake his head, his eyes clouded and distant. Just bad dreams, he'd murmur before changing the subject. The most jarring incident occurred during a rare Sunday visit to town for supplies. They were in the general store run by a portly, gossiping man named Percival Finch. As Abigail was inspecting bolts of calico, a rough-looking man, a drifter by the look of his worn clothes and unshaven face, stumbled in. He squinted at Caleb, who had his back to him. "Say," the drifter slurred, pointing a grimy finger, "don't I know you from down near the border, Laredo, maybe?" Abigail watched as Caleb's entire body went rigid. He didn't turn around. "You've got the wrong man, friend," he said, his voice dangerously low. He placed his items on the counter, his movements swift and precise. "Nah, I'm sure of it," the man persisted, taking a step closer. "You got the same look about you as a fella I knew. Ran with the Maddox gang. Kane Maddox. Mean as a snake, that one." Every person in the store went silent. The name hung in the air, ugly and foreign. Kane Maddox. Caleb slowly turned his face, a mask of cold fury. His kind eyes were gone, replaced by something hard and flat. It was a look Abigail had never seen before, and it frightened her. "I said," he enunciated each word a chip of ice, "you have the wrong man." The drifter, suddenly sobered by the sheer menace in Caleb's voice, stammered an apology and backed out of the store. Caleb paid Mr. Finch in silence, his jaw clenched. The ride home was tense and quiet. Abigail wanted to ask, wanted to understand the venom in that stranger's words and the terrifying transformation she had witnessed in her husband. But the cold wall around him was impenetrable. She told herself it was nothing, a drunk's foolish rambling, a case of mistaken identity. But she couldn't shake the name, Cain Maddox. She couldn't shake the image of Caleb's face, stripped of all its kindness, looking like a complete and utter stranger. The whispers of a new life were beautiful, but underneath them Abigail was beginning to hear the faint, discordant echo of an old one. The uneasy quiet that had settled over the ranch after the incident in town persisted for days. Caleb was withdrawn, his conversations clipped, his smiles forced. He threw himself into his work, with a ferocious energy mending fences and breaking horses from sunup to sundown, as if physical exhaustion could chase away the ghosts that haunted him. Abigail tried to breach the wall between them, but her gentle inquiries were met with a shuttered look and a vague assurance that everything was fine. It was not fine. The loving, if shy man she had married had been replaced by a guarded stranger, and the name, Cain Maddox, was a specter in their home. The children felt the change too. Luke grew quieter, his stream of questions drying up. Matthew's watchfulness intensified his gaze, flitting between his father and Abigail, sensing the discord but not understanding its source. Only little Josie, in her innocent bliss, remained unchanged, a small bright sun in a suddenly overcast world. Abigail's anxiety festered. The drunkard's words could be dismissed, but Caleb's reaction could not. It was the reaction of a man with something to hide, a terrible secret. Her mind, once filled with pastoral dreams of home and family, now raced with darker possibilities. Who was Caleb Hawthorne? Where had he come from before Redemption Gulch? Why had a man so devoted to his children chosen a life that required him to constantly look over his shoulder? The truth, when it came, was not delivered in a late-night confession or a tearful breakdown. It was delivered on a flimsy sheet of paper tacked to a public board for all the world to see. It happened on a Tuesday. Caleb had ridden out to the far pastures to check on a section of fence damaged by a recent storm, a task that would take him the entire day. The ranch felt empty without him, the silence heavier than usual. Needing a reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere and running low on flour and thread, Abigail decided to take the buckboard into town herself. She bundled Josie onto the seat beside her, leaving Matthew and Luke with Ben, the old ranch hand, who promised to keep them occupied. The drive to Redemption Gulch did little to soothe her nerves. Every shadow on the trail seemed to hold a threat, every distant rider a potential danger. She was beginning to see the world through Caleb's eyes, and it was a frightening place. After tethering the horse outside Finch's General Store, she took Josie by the hand and walked across the dusty street towards the sheriff's office to check the mail. Sheriff Brody, a man whose weary expression suggested he'd seen too much of the West's darker side, maintained a small post office in a corner of his headquarters. As she approached, she saw a small group of men clustered around the notice board outside, murmuring amongst themselves. Their expressions were a mixture of excitement and apprehension. A new bounty. It was always a source of gossip in a town where life could be achingly dull. Abigail paid them little mind her thoughts on her shopping list. She stepped inside the cool, dim office. Sheriff Brody nodded at her from behind his desk. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hawthorne." "Sheriff," she replied politely. "Just checking for any post." "Right here for you," he said, handing her a catalog from a Chicago department store and a letter from her aunt in Boston. As she turned to leave, her gaze drifted through the window to the notice board. One of the posters, newer than the rest, had caught the wind flapping slightly. For a brief, heart-stopping second, she saw a familiar face. Her blood ran cold. "Excuse me, Sheriff," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That new notice. What is it for?" Brody sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Bounty hunter came through this morning. A fella named Finn Riley. Put it up himself, looking for a train robber. Part of a gang that hit a Union Pacific line down in Wyoming 2 years back. Made off with a federal payroll. A real nasty piece of work by the sounds of it." Abigail's hand tightened on Josie's. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She forced herself to walk outside, to push through the lingering group of men, her movements stiff and robotic. She had to see. She had to know. And there it was. Wanted $5,000 reward, dead or alive. Below the bold black letters was a detailed sketch, an artist's rendering from witness descriptions. It was older, the face thinner, harder, with a cynical curl to the lip that she had never seen. But there was no mistaking it. The dark, deep-set eyes, the straight line of the nose, the strong, square jaw. It was Caleb. Her breath hitched, the world tilted on its axis, the sounds of the street, the creak of a wagon, the laughter from the saloon fading into a dull roar in her ears. Below the drawing, another name was printed in stark, unforgiving type. Cain Maddox. The name from the general store, the name of a snake, the name of a train robber, the name of her husband, the father of the children who called her mama. A wave of nausea washed over her. The promises, the gentle touches, the shared smiles, were they all a lie? Was this life, this family she had embraced so wholly built on a foundation of stolen money and violence? The $5,000 reward was a fortune more than enough to tempt any man in this hard-scrabble territory. It was a death sentence, tacked to a board. Mama Josie's small voice cut through her shock. "Go home, Mama, home." The word was a bitter irony. What was home now? A fugitive's hideout, a ticking clock waiting for a man like Finn Riley to connect a quiet rancher to a wanted poster. Abigail snatched the poster from the board, tearing the corners where the tacks held it fast. She didn't care that the men stared that Sheriff Brody was now standing in his doorway, his expression sharp with sudden interest. She crumpled the paper into a tight ball in her fist, grabbed Josie, and half ran back to the buckboard. The ride back to the ranch was a frantic, terrifying blur. Her mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and fear. Every good memory was now tainted, every kind word now suspect. She saw it all with horrifying clarity, his aversion to being photographed, his nightmares, his guardedness, his violent reaction to the drifter. It all made a terrible perfect sense. When she arrived, she stormed into the house, her face pale and set. She found the rifle Caleb kept mounted over the fireplace, her hands shaking as she took it down. She didn't know if she could use it, but the cold, heavy weight of it was a small comfort against the terror that consumed her. She sat in the main room, the rifle across her lap, the crumpled wanted poster on the table, and waited. She waited for the man she had married, the stranger named Cain Maddox, to come home. The sun bled across the sky, and the shadows grew long. When she finally heard the sound of his horse in the yard, her entire body trembled. The door opened, and Caleb walked in weary from his day's work. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes going from her white, stricken face to the rifle in her lap, and finally to the balled-up piece of paper on the table. The color drained from his face. The kindness in his eyes vanished, replaced by the haunted look of a man who had been running for a very long time and had just reached the end of the line. "Abigail!" He began, his voice raspy. "Don't," she commanded, her own voice shaking, but firm. She smoothed the wrinkled poster on the table, her finger trembling as she pointed at the name. "Who is Cain Maddox?" The silence in the log house was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the hearth and the frantic beating of Abigail's heart. Caleb stood frozen in the doorway, the setting sun silhouetting his frame, casting a long, dark shadow that stretched across the floorboards to where she sat. The weariness of his long day was gone, replaced by a stark, hunted expression. He looked from the rifle she held to the wanted poster, and a flicker of something that might have been resignation or perhaps even relief passed through his eyes. He slowly closed the door behind him, the latch clicking shut with an air of finality. He didn't move toward her, but leaned back against the rough-hewn wood, his hands held loosely at his sides. "Where are the children?" he asked, his voice low and strained. With Ben, she answered, her voice tight. They're safe. Safer than they are with you, I imagine. The accusation struck him like a physical blow. He flinched, his gaze falling to the floor. Abigail. I can explain. Explain? She repeated, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping her lips. Explain what, Caleb, or should I call you Cain? Explain that you're a wanted man, a train robber, that the life you've built here, the family you've asked me to be a part of, is a complete and utter lie. Explain the $5,000 price on your head. How long did you think you could hide? Did you think I was so naive, so desperate, that I would never find out? Every question was a shard of glass born of terror and a profound sense of betrayal. The man she had come to care for, the man her children called Papa, was a phantom. In his place stood a criminal, a man with a past so dark it threatened to consume them all. The name is Caleb Hawthorne, he said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading. That is who I am now. That is who I have been for 3 years. A name is just a name, she retorted, gesturing wildly at the poster. That is your face. Cain Maddox mean as a snake. That's what the man in the store said. Is that who you are? He took a hesitant step forward, and she instinctively tightened her grip on the rifle. He stopped immediately, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. Please, Abigail, let me tell you everything. You deserve that much. She stared at him, her mind a war zone of conflicting emotions. Fear battled with a desperate, lingering hope that there was an explanation, any explanation that could make sense of this nightmare. She thought of Matthew's quiet trust, Luke's easy affection, Josie's small hand in hers. They were the reason she was here. They were the reason she had to know the truth. She gave a short, sharp nod, her knuckles white on the stock of the rifle. He took a deep breath, the air rattling in his chest. I was born Cain Maddox, he began, his voice hollowed out by memory. My father was a sharecropper in Missouri, a man broken by debt and drought. When he died, the bank took everything. My mother followed soon after. I was 16 with nothing to my name but a temper. He walked over to the window, staring out at the darkening landscape, his back to her. I fell in with a bad crowd, older men who saw a strong back and a foolish boy. At first, it was just rustling a few head of cattle. Then it was holding up stagecoaches. It was easy money, and for a while, it felt like I was finally hitting back at a world that had taken everything from me. The leader of the gang was a man named Bartholomew Thorne. He was smart-charming and utterly ruthless. He taught me how to shoot, how to ride, how to be invisible. He also taught me how to be cruel. Abigail listened, her anger slowly being tempered by a chilling fascination. This was the story of the man behind the kind eyes, the dark history he kept locked away. I met Martha, my late wife, in a small town in Kansas. He continued, his voice softening. She was a preacher's daughter. She saw something in me that even I didn't know was there. For her, I wanted to be a better man. I tried to leave the life, but Thorne, he doesn't let people go. He said I owed him. I ran away with Martha, and we drifted for years, always looking over our shoulder. We changed our names, took on odd jobs. That's when Matthew and Luke were born. For a few years, we were almost happy. His shoulders slumped. Then Thorne found us. He didn't want me back in the gang. Not then. He wanted to use me. He knew about a Union Pacific train carrying a federal payroll. He said if I helped with this one last job, he'd give me a cut big enough to disappear for good. He said if I refused. He threatened Martha and the boys. I saw what he was capable of, Abigail. I believed him. He turned to face her now, his face etched with pain and regret. So I did it. I rode with them. But the robbery went wrong. A guard, a young man no older than I was when I started, pulled his gun. Before I could stop him, one of Thorne's men shot him. He died right there on the floor of the mail car. The whole thing turned bloody. Abigail felt a fresh wave of sickness. He was there. He was part of it. We got the money. Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper. But I knew I couldn't stay. Thorne and his men were celebrating drinking. I took my share, and I fled into the night. I never saw them again. I used the money to buy this ranch, this place, as far away from that life as I could get. I gave myself a new name, Caleb Hawthorne, hoping it would make me a new man. It was all for them, for my family. What about Martha Abigail? Asked her voice, quiet. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. The running, the fear, it took its toll. She was never strong after Josie was born. A fever took her a year after we got here. She died in my arms right in this house. She made me promise I would protect the children, promise I would never let that old life touch them. He looked at her, his eyes raw with unshed tears. I sent for you, Abigail, because I couldn't do it alone. The boys needed a mother. I needed a good woman to help me make this a real home, to wash away the stain of what I'd been. I know it was a lie of omission, the worst kind. But my love for those children and the hope I had for a life with you, that was real. It's the only real thing. I have left. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. He was a thief. He had been complicit in a man's death. But he had also done it in his own twisted way for the love of his family. He was both men, the gentle father, and the wanted fugitive. Abigail slowly, deliberately placed the rifle on the floor beside her chair. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now intertwined with a terrible, aching pity. She looked at this broken man, and she saw not just the criminal Cain Maddox, but the desperate father, Caleb Hawthorne. A bounty hunter put up that poster today, she said, her voice flat. A man named Finn Riley. The whole town is talking about it. How long until he or someone else looks at you and sees that poster? Caleb's face went pale. Finn Riley. He breathed the name like a curse. He's relentless. He's been hunting members of Thorne's gang for years. The immediate threat was no longer a phantom from the past. It had a name, and it was in their town. The lie had finally caught up to them. The question was no longer just about who Caleb was, but about what would happen to them all when Finn Riley came knocking on their door. The revelation shattered the fragile peace of the Hawthorne ranch, replacing it with a constant humming tension. Every snap of a twig, every distant bark of a dog sent a jolt of fear through Abigail. She looked at Caleb and saw two men layered over one another, the loving father who taught Luke how to whittle, and the haunted fugitive who checked the horizon 12 times an hour. Sleep offered little respite for either of them. He was plagued by his nightmares, and she was kept awake by the terrifying reality of their situation. The wanted poster, which she had hidden away in the bottom of her trunk, felt like a physical weight in the house. She had made a choice, a silent, unvoiced decision in the wake of his confession. She did not pack her bags. When Matthew and Luke returned to the house that evening, she hugged them with a ferocity that surprised them. When Josie called her mama, she did not correct her. She had come here to be a mother to these children, and a man's past, no matter how dark, would not change that. Her love for them was the one solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. Whether she could love the man he had been was a question for another time. For now, she had to protect the family they had become. They fell into a new, grim routine. By day, they were the Hawthornes. Abigail ran the house, Caleb and Ben worked the ranch, and the children played, their laughter a painful reminder of the innocence at stake. But by night, Caleb and Abigail were conspirators. They spoke in low whispers after the children were asleep, poring over the possibilities. "We could run," he said one night, his head in his hands. "Take the children, head north for the Canadian border. Start over again." With what Abigail countered, her voice pragmatic. "The money from the robbery is gone, invested in this land, this stock. We would be penniless. And Finn Riley is a bounty hunter. He hunts men for a living. He'd expect you to run." Caleb knew she was right. They were trapped. Their sanctuary had become their cage. The ranch bought with stolen money was the only real thing they had, and it was the very thing that tethered them to this spot, waiting for the hunter to close in. The hunter's presence was felt even when he wasn't seen. Ben would come back from trips to town with news. Finn Riley was still in Redemption Gulch, staying at the boarding house. He was a quiet, patient man, Ben reported. He didn't ask a lot of questions, but he watched. He sat on the porch of the general store for hours, his gaze sweeping over every rider, every farmer who came and went. He was waiting for a flicker of recognition, a single misstep. The misstep came not from Caleb, but from the past itself. It was a blistering hot afternoon, a week after Abigail had found the poster. The air was still and heavy. Abigail was canning peaches in the kitchen, the sweet cloying steam filling the small space. The children were napping through the worst of the heat. Suddenly, the dogs in the yard began to bark a frantic, aggressive sound that was different from their usual warnings. Abigail's heart leaped into her throat. She wiped her hands on her apron and peered through the kitchen window. 3 riders were approaching the house. They were not cowboys or local ranchers. They were hard-faced men, armed with rifles and a palpable air of menace. The man in the lead was older, with a neatly trimmed silver beard and cold, intelligent eyes. He wore a black duster despite the heat, and sat his horse with an easy, confident arrogance. Caleb came running from the barn, his face a mask of disbelief and pure terror. Abigail had never seen him so afraid. "Get the children," he hissed at her through the open door, his hand already on his colt. "Take them to the root cellar. Bar the door. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." "Caleb, who is it?" she pleaded, her hands trembling. He looked at the lead rider, whose lips were curled into a predatory smile as he surveyed the ranch. "It's him," Caleb choked out. "Bartholomew Thorne." The name struck Abigail with the force of a physical blow. The ruthless gang leader from Caleb's confession. The man he had fled. The devil himself was on their doorstep. Before she could move, Thorne's voice, cultured and clear, cut through the air. "Cain, my boy, is this any way to greet an old friend? I come all this way for a reunion, and you look as if you've seen a ghost." Thorne and his men dismounted their spurs, jingling ominously. They walked towards the porch, their movements slow and deliberate, the actions of men who were in complete control. "What do you want?" Thorne Caleb demanded, positioning himself between the men and the front door of the house. "What do I want?" Thorne chuckled a dry, unpleasant sound. "I want to reminisce. I want to talk about old times and new opportunities. I heard a rumor that a very large sum of federal money went missing a few years back. And then I heard a rumor about a quiet rancher in Montana who seemed to have come into some wealth around the same time. I put the two together. I've always been good at sums." He let his cold gaze drift over the house, the barn, the healthy livestock. "You've done well for yourself, Cain. A nice peaceful life, a home. I see you've even replaced poor Martha. Found yourself another pretty little thing." His eyes landed on Abigail, who was frozen in the doorway, and his smile widened. It didn't touch his eyes. "This has nothing to do with her," Caleb growled. "Oh, I think it does," Thorne said smoothly. "You see a man with a place like this, with a family. He has so much more to lose. My business ventures require a new infusion of capital, Cain, and I've come to collect your investment, with interest." Suddenly, the naptime quiet was shattered by a sleepy cry from inside the house. "Mama!" It was Luke's voice. Thorne's head snapped toward the sound. A new, far more sinister light gleamed in his eyes. "Well, what have we here? The rumors were true. You have children. 3 of them, I hear. Bring them out, Cain. I'd love to meet the family you built with my money." The threat was no longer veiled. It was raw and immediate. Thorne wasn't just here for money. He was here to exert his power to remind Cain Maddox that he could never truly escape. He would use Caleb's new life, his children, the very things he had committed his crimes to protect, as leverage to destroy him. Caleb's face was ashen. He was trapped between the monster from his past and the family that was his only hope for a future. And Abigail, standing in the doorway, realized with chilling certainty that this was a confrontation that couldn't be solved with a quiet departure or a desperate hope. The violence Caleb had tried to outrun had found them, and it was standing on their front porch. The world seemed to shrink to the space of the front porch, the air thick with menace. Bartholomew Thorne's cruel request to see the children hung between them, a threat more potent than any drawn weapon. Caleb's hand hovered over his gun, his body a taut line of desperation. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. It was in that moment of paralyzing fear that something shifted inside Abigail. The terror was still there, a cold serpent coiled in her belly, but it was being eclipsed by a fierce, primal rage. These men were threatening her children. They were threatening her home. The genteel Boston companion was gone, burned away by the harsh Montana sun and the fierce love she felt for this family. In her place stood a mother. "They are sleeping," she said, her voice clear and steady, surprising even herself. She stepped out onto the porch, positioning herself slightly in front of the door, a physical barrier between Thorne and the inside of the house. Thorne's eyebrow arched in amusement. "And who might you be, madam, the new Mrs. Maddox?" "My name is Mrs. Hawthorne," she stated, her chin high. "And you are trespassing on our property. I suggest you state your business and be on your way." A low chuckle rumbled from one of Thorne's men, but Thorne silenced him with a glance. He took a step closer, his cold eyes appraising her. "Hawthorne? How quaint. You have spirit, I'll grant you that. But you are far out of your depth. This is a conversation between old business partners. Any business you had with my husband is in the past," Abigail said, her mind racing. She needed to buy time. She needed a plan. Panicked thoughts swirled the rifle over the mantel. Ben out in the fields, the distance to town. Nothing was fast enough. Her gaze flickered past Thorne's shoulder toward the dusty road leading to Redemption Gulch. It was empty. They were utterly alone. Or were they? An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form in her mind. It was a gamble of the highest order, a bluff that could get them all killed. But it was the only card she had to play. "Is it?" she challenged, forcing a confident, almost mocking tone. "It seems to me your business is with the law. We heard a bounty hunter, Mr. Finn Riley, was in town, asking about a certain train robbery, offering $5,000 for information leading to the capture of Cain Maddox and his associates." She saw a flicker of uncertainty in Thorne's eyes. Caleb shot her a look of pure panic, certain she had just signed their death warrants, but Abigail held Thorne's gaze, refusing to back down. "You see, Mr. Thorne," she continued, pressing her advantage, "my husband has been in communication with Mr. Riley. He's tired of running. He's ready to tell the authorities everything he knows about the Wyoming robbery, about who shot that guard, about who planned the entire operation. He's willing to trade his testimony for a lesser sentence. Your name, I believe, featured quite prominently in his discussions with the bounty hunter. It was a complete and utter lie, a fabrication born of desperation, but it was a plausible one." Thorne stared at her, then at Caleb, who, catching on, straightened up, his expression shifting from terror to a mask of grim resolve. "She's right, Bart," Caleb said, his voice hard. "The deal is already on the table. Riley is just waiting for me to bring him something more, to bring him the man who pulled the trigger. Or better yet, the man who gave the order." The atmosphere on the porch crackled. Thorne's men shifted uneasily, glancing at their leader. A lone wolf was one thing. A man who was already cooperating with the law was another entirely. Their loyalty was to profit, not to a leader who might be walking them into a trap. Thorne's cold smile returned, but it was strained now. "A clever story, madam. Very clever. But I don't believe you. Don't you?" Abigail's voice was ice. "Mr. Riley is a patient man, but he's not a fool. He knows we're out here. He knows you're here. In fact, he's expecting you." She allowed herself a small, confident smile. "We told him you might pay us a visit. He said he'd be waiting for a signal." She subtly moved her hand toward the small dinner bell that hung on a post by the porch steps used to call the men in from the fields. Thorne's eyes followed her movement. The bluff was perfect. A lone ranch, a dinner bell. It was a common enough signal. Was it possible? Had Cain truly turned on them? The risk, however small, of riding into an ambush set by a determined bounty hunter was a powerful deterrent. $5,000 was a lot of money, but it was no good to a dead man. For a long, agonizing moment, no one moved. The fate of the family hung on the believability of Abigail's lie. Thorne's gaze bored into her, searching for any sign of deception. She met it without flinching, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finally, with a soft curse, Thorne took a step back. "This isn't over, Cain," he snarled, his confident facade crumbling into pure menace. "No deal will keep you safe from me. Not forever." He turned on his heel and strode back to his horse. His men, looking relieved, followed suit. They mounted their horses, kicked them into a gallop, and disappeared in a cloud of dust, riding away not toward town, but across the open prairie, away from the potential trap. The moment they were out of sight, Abigail's strength deserted her. Her knees buckled, and Caleb caught her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. She buried her face in his chest, her body racked with tremors. "You saved us," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with awe and emotion. "Abigail, you saved us all." She hadn't saved them, not yet. She had only bought them a reprieve. Thorne was still out there. And more importantly, Finn Riley was still in town. The lie she had told had chased away one devil, but it had also set a new, irreversible course. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, their peaceful sleep, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the day, Abigail and Caleb sat at the kitchen table. The rifle was back on its mount. The house was quiet. "Your bluff," Caleb said, shaking his head in disbelief. "It was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "It's not enough," Abigail said quietly, looking at him. "Thorne will be back, or someone else will come. We can't live like this, Caleb. The children can't live like this." He knew she was right. The fear, the lies, the constant looking over his shoulder. It wasn't a life. "Your lie today," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Let's make it the truth." He stared at her. "What do you mean? Let's go to Sheriff Brody. And to Finn Riley. Let's tell them everything. About Thorne, about the robbery, about why you did it. You said you wanted to trade your testimony. Let's do it. It's the only way. The only way to truly be free of Cain Maddox and be Caleb Hawthorne for good. It was an unimaginable risk. It could mean prison. It could mean losing everything he had built. But as he looked at Abigail, at the strength and courage that radiated from her, he saw the path forward. She had not run from his past. She had faced it down with him. She was offering him not just an escape, but a chance at true redemption. He reached across the table and took her hands. They were calloused and strong. They were the hands of his partner, his wife. "Okay," he said, his voice clear and certain for the first time in years. "We'll do it. Together." The next morning they rode into Redemption Gulch not as fugitives, but as a family. Caleb and Abigail sat on the buckboard with Matthew, Luke, and Josie between them. They were heading toward the sheriff's office, toward an uncertain future. But for the first time since Abigail had arrived, there were no more secrets. No more lies. Whatever happened next, they would face it as one. The promise in the photograph had been of a simple life, but what they had found was something far more complex and infinitely more precious. They had found a love forged in fear, a family bonded by a dangerous truth, and a courage they never knew they possessed. And so, the story of Caleb and Abigail Hawthorne doesn't end with a gunshot, but with a choice. A choice to face the past head-on, to trust in the law, and to prove that a family built on love is stronger than any lie. What happened when they walked into that sheriff's office? Did Finn Riley see a criminal or a man trying to save his family? Did the law show mercy? Their greatest battle was yet to come, fought not with guns but with truth and courage in a dusty Montana town. If you were captivated by Abigail's bravery and the dramatic twists in the life of the fugitive father, make sure to hit that like button and share this story with someone who loves a real-life historical drama. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next story from the untamed heart of the Wild West.